today, and it's absolutely fantastic because I've seen the presentation, we have Paul Manuel here, and he is from the Scarborough Fly and Bait Casting Association. He's actually the vice president for them. He's been fly fishing since the 1970s. And guess what, folks? In the mid-1980s, he learned with fly tie with us at the Izaak Walton Club. And he continued with us and was the membership chairman in 1988. And he's been collecting for such a long time. And when we were going through the actual test, he educated me on reels and how he looks up the information and everything. And it was fantastic. And I'm just looking for his insight and his expertise and thank him for joining us. Okay, Paul, if you want to take it away, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. As Brian said, I've been collecting a long time. And one of the things that I realized after I got over the need to have reels is that some of these reels are great to fish with, and especially for fly fishermen like us, there's some great older high quality reels that can be had. So just want to bring your attention to the wide variety of reels and the kinds of things that people collect. And maybe when you're going to a junk sale or an antique shop or a yard sale or whatever, something might catch your eye as a result of this presentation. And whether it's fly fishing or bass fishing with a level wind reel on a steel rod, or deep sea fishing, trolling like the guy in the bottom left, that is, the sort of covers the gamut of fishing styles. And I'm going to talk about the types of reels that you can see out there. So, as Brian mentioned, I was a member of the Izaak Walton Club back in the 80s. And there was a fellow, a very high profile individual, some of you may know or knew of, Ted Knott. And besides being all the things that he was, great fly fisherman, a fly tyer, an educator, and a bamboo rod builder, he also collected fishing reels and good ones. And one night he came to a meeting like this when we were physically meeting, and he brought in a bunch of his old reels, and I saw one and I said, oh geez, I've never seen anything like that. It was so exciting and I had to have one. So one day, I don't know, sometime later, maybe a year later, I'm in an antique mall and I saw this reel that's shown on the screen. And I recognized that it was an ancient reel. And actually there were two of them. So I made a deal with the vendor and I took them home, and that was sort of what got me hooked on reels. This is something that really appealed to me, and I just wanted to keep going. They say if you're a collector of anything, if you have three of something, you're a collector. So it didn't take me long to get into this hobby. I've accumulated a lot of reels, and I am interested in the oldest reels I can find. That is not particularly common among established reel collectors. Usually they go after whatever they fish with when they're a kid to begin with, or they inherited reels and they sort of build upon that. An old reel can be a reel that was on sale at Bass Pro a year ago and is no longer available. So it really just depends on what you're interested in doing. So I have a lot of reels. I have boxes of reels, Rubbermaid bins full of reels. I even have some around me right here, so I can pull out examples if you want. And my collecting eventually led me into the Old Reel Collectors Association. There's about 700 people there. And a couple of years ago, I was the vice president of that club as well. And I was their webmaster and run their website and that sort of thing. I have a little hobby website called reallyOldReels.com. So you'll see some of my stuff on there, some of my fish pictures, because I like to fish too. I'm also a member of the Canadian Antique Fishing Tackle Association, which is more oriented towards lures but I kind of drummed up interest in reels there over the years. And so I've been writing articles, researching and writing articles about Canadian reel makers, which is one of my sub collections. So like every organization, due to COVID, we had to cancel our annual convention at the Orca Club. And it was supposed to be held in Kentucky, and they didn't do it. They did it online. And so we were given the opportunity to do a virtual table display. And it was like a contest. And I had accumulated this collection of ancient British brass multipliers, like earliest form of level winding reels without the level winding guide. One of those reels is extremely rare. It's been shown in collector books, and it was probably made in about 1830 based on the inscription on the front. So anyhow, I did a pretty elaborate analysis of all the reels up to and including things like gear teeth ratios, which just decided which handles had ivory and which ones were not ivory, and got into all kinds of detail. Well, most reel collectors don't get into that level of detail, but I did, and I ended up getting second place in that. So that was pretty good. Not bad for a first effort anyway. The purpose tonight is to open your minds to the wide variety of reels that are out there. Of course, we all know fly reels, and I presume all of you fish and have fished other methods besides fly fishing. And the history of reel development started elsewhere. It didn't start with fly reels like we know them today. So these are categories in no particular order that Steve Vernon actually put together. So in general, you have your casting reels, Kentucky reels, what we call Kentucky reels, and level wind reels. Most of them have multiplying gears. Most of these are for freshwater rather than ocean or salt water. The Kentucky reels are interesting. The picture at the bottom there is one if you've never heard of them. So there were some artisans, watchmakers that settled into Kentucky. There was quite a few of them, a few dozen. And starting around 1815, they started making these handmade reels. And the one that I show you, I have that one. I have it here actually. And I believe it is made out of coin silver. So it's quite a nice one, and it's got an ivory knob on it. At the top, there's a picture there of a rod and reel combination that you could find in a flea market or an antique market. And that one is actually, it was pretty much new in the box. And that's what a lot of collectors go for these days is, fishable vintage reels in excellent condition in boxes with the paperwork. And there's, somebody wants to collect Fluger reels. Just with the Fluger Supreme, there is 25 varieties. So you could spend a lifetime and a small fortune just collecting that one thing. The reel at the bottom, the Meek and Milam, in today's collector market would go anywhere for $500 to $1,000 US. So that's almost like cash. A lot of reels are worthless. The reel at the top, beaten up without all of the accompaniments, is, if it has all the parts and it's working, it's probably worth 35 bucks. And if it's missing parts, wrong handle, that sort of thing, it might be worth 10 bucks. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the presentation, but the values, so a lot of people are interested in the values. Usually the first question I get asked when somebody has an interest in an old reel is, what's it worth? So it depends a lot on who made it, when they made it. In other words, the rarity, the cosmetic condition, and the mechanical condition. And you can get an old reel like that, and you can see in the collector book that it's worth $1,000, but you have to really know that reel before you should pay $1,000, because it might be worth a lot less. And in some cases, it can be worth a lot more. People don't always know what they've got to sell. And I restore reels. The reel at the bottom there had a lot of cosmetic issues when I got it, and I did bring it back to looking like it does at the moment. Usually I try and avoid touching the reels, but I do have quite a bit of experience restoring them. So then getting into more familiar reels, the fly fishing reels, well, a lot of us are familiar with this kind of, narrow drum and single action fly reels. And this picture is a collection of a fellow in the States. His name is Mike Noguet. He's a lawyer. He founded the Old Reel Collectors Association, and he has this thing for Orvis fly reels. Orvis patented this fly reel design in 1874, and it was the precursor to the modern fly reel that we use today, the narrow single action fly reel. These are quite valuable. They start around $200 and they probably go to well over $1,000 for, and maybe the original one might be $5,000. The original one on the bottom of the foot, Charles Orvis actually hand scribed the patent date on the bottom of each reel foot that he made. So it's quite an interesting thing to see. And this fellow has got a huge accumulation of Orvis stuff and lots of other things. So you could spend a lifetime, and I'll talk about other fly reels as well, but you could spend a lifetime collecting fly reels, and you could spend a small fortune. But if you like fly reels, there are lots of fly reels that are out there, old ones that you could get at reasonable prices, and some of them are quite fishable. We don't see these too much here, but there is a whole stream of collectors interested in big game reels. So of course in fly fishing, we have a big game fly fishing reel, but these are huge reels, like big as your head. You can see the picture at the bottom. There's the type of seat that you would see at the back of a sport fishing boat on the ocean. It's got the gimbal for the rod between the angler's legs and this big, huge reel. This particular one was made in England by an obscure engineering company, and you would get harnessed into that. Some of the famous names are Arthur Kovalovsky, who was a Hollywood maker, and he made some of the reels up here. And just recently, somebody I know in New Jersey found one in a garage sale and got it for a song, and it's probably worth $1,000. Zane Gray, a famous person, an author and a famous fisherman, used to do his deep sea fishing with this type of outfit. Usually reels come in a variety of sizes. Even these kinds of reels, they would do series of them. And the middle sizes are kind of the most common ones. And the smaller and the largest of the series, from a collector's point of view, are the ones that have more collector value because not as many were sold. There were two outside the norm. So yeah, I was having dinner at an orca convention a couple of years ago, and I met this collector, and he'd bought one of these custom-made deep sea reels in a cradle, and he spent $20,000 US. Then he complained it cost a couple of thousand to ship it. So then spinning reels are becoming more and more popular for collectors, even though they were not made long ago. You've probably fished with a Mitchell or Shimano spinning reel, but there are loads and loads of spinning reel manufacturers, and a lot of people don't realize some of the high quality spinning reels were made in Italy, and some of the earlier reels you'll find that have unusual bails, like half bails. Even Hardy made spinning reels. Closed face spinning reels are a relatively new trend in, at least among the Old Reel Collectors Association members. We had our last physical annual convention in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where Zebco had its factory before Japan started making the reels. And now they're just a marketing company. But there are some very collectible Zebco closed face spinning reels. To me, the interesting thing about closed face spinning reels is that the very first ones in North America made for Shakespeare and South Bend were made here in Toronto by Inglis. So that's kind of interesting. And I've got a couple like that. Then again, back in fly reels, lots of automatic fly reels out there. Some of them are very common and you get them for like nothing, for like $5. And some of them can be quite pricey. I just sold a bunch. I had a bunch of ones shown on the bottom with the key wind and the non-key wind. Those are from the late 1800s, patented, moderately rare, and some of them are quite pricey. The ones made in brass, the ones made in hard rubber, or what they call ebonite, are quite rare. The ones you see at the top, like the Martins in the red boxes, those are fairly common. They come in different sizes, so you could, have a huge variety and so many different models, and then varieties of models, and you get specials. You'll find them engraved. So, I probably have 100 automatic reels that I haven't even shown. Those are just kind of the cohesive collections that I've got. Then you have this style of reel. It's called an Indiana reel. Looks like a bicycle spoke, mostly associated with companies that made them in Indiana, and people like that would fish in farm ponds with bait, and they would have cotton line that would rot, so they'd have it on these big spokes to stop it from rotting. There was, interesting to me and not too many other reel collectors, is that there was one of this style that was patented in Canada by a Russian immigrant, August Bukaki, and it was sold through Winnipeg Bicycle Sales, a very obscure company, and lure collectors will also know it because they made the Royal brand lures, which are kind of collectible. Anyhow, I got one and it cost me a hell of a lot of money. I had to do a 3 or 4-way trade to get it. And it's very rare. There's only about 5 of them known in collectors' hands. And I think in one of the big fishing reel auctions, one went for about $500 US, so they're not cheap either. Then you have rod and reel combinations. The one at the top is a Gyratory Reel, 1884. It's patented. It is super rare and valuable. I have seen one, don't have one. The one below that is called a Gyratory Reel. And I think that is like a single action reel, but every revolution of the handle, the spool rotates and it goes back and forth like that. And so the effect is the level wind, the line on the reel without a level winding mechanism. So it's kind of innovative. And then at the bottom is an example of the very common type of rod reel combos that we see here in Southern Ontario. You go to a flea market, antique shop, or that sort of garage sale. Up at the cottage, you might have some of these in the boathouse. This is a Murphy troller, and I wrote an article about Murphy, who's an electrician working for the fire department in LaSalle, which is a suburb of Windsor, Ontario, and he was making these apparently in his garage. They've got a very neat Tommy gun handle, very cool. We have what is generally classified as innovative, oddball. A lot of the reels are patented, so I wouldn't call those unusual. The Harris combination reel, that thing at the top, it's physically it's about 1 foot long. In the bottom right hand corner here is a Fowler Gem. And it looks like a fly reel, but I think these were, you know, basically used for, you know, cotton line and maybe even bait fishing, or the very earliest form of fly fishing in America. This one is vulcanized rubber. It was made by a dentist. It's just very, very delicate and very pricey. It's like a $1,500 reel to a collector, but I wouldn't want to own one because you never know when it's going to disintegrate. Then another example of a weird reel on the left is a Stalder reel. I think it's like a belly reel. I'm not even sure how that one works. I think it affixes to your belt and used for ocean fishing. You have your New York style and ball handle reels. And as you see on the top picture and on the bottom, these are counterbalanced handles on big brass reels. And there were many makers, and they're quite collectible. And there were not a lot of, there were many makers, but there were really more retailers who put their names on them than there were makers. The reel at the top is very interesting. Like a lot of my reels, I actually got that in Canada. And this is an interesting one, R&L Lewis. It's a very rare reel to see the R&L Lewis name on the reel. They made a lot of reels. They also made harps for the theater in New York. It's Reese Lewis and his son, Levan, and they established business in New York. And sometimes they were listed as reel makers and sometimes listed as harp makers. But it's rare to see their name on a reel. And I happen to get one by way of a collector friend up here. And it is in absolutely mint condition. And the surface on it is incredible. You could see the sand grains in the casting. It's really, really spectacular. Then you have one in the bottom here, and that's a very specialized version that's on a mount that swivels. Kind of interesting. Then in northern climates, at least, we have ice fishing tackle. And I don't know of a lot of people that are collecting those things, but I've found in antique markets, you know, old, very old setup. Then you have what we call homemade reels. And a lot of them look like they were production made, well made by machinists, maybe hobbyists. And it's possible that they made these and didn't mark them, but I think there are a lot that were made by, you know, machinists as a hobby, or made them for their friends. We find them, you know, in cottage country quite a bit. The one on the left did actually come from the Lakefield area. And I've seen some trench art reels basically made out of coins and nails and kind of cobbled together. It's very interesting. You see old tin cans that have been repurposed. And actually the closed face spinning reel that Zebco made famous started out life as a soda can with line wrapped around it. And the guy that invented it, Artie Hull, showed he could cast his lure over the building. Interesting, on the bottom left is the part of the collection of old reels I used for my presentation, the Old Reel Collectors Association, reels dating from, as I said before, 1830 to about, I don't know, 1900 or so. Top right, these are called Starback Nottingham reels. The Brits also called them spinning reels, and they're what we would call a float reel, basically. And so these have, you know, two handles typically, and a revolving drum. What characterizes these is that they have a Starback brace, typically made out of mahogany, but not exclusively out of mahogany. And these particular ones were made by a very obscure early maker, Andrew Brailsford, who made his Starbacks in a very specific way. He made them fishtails, so they're split at the ends. And furthermore, all those edges are chamfered. And then on the bottom is an example of high quality American ocean reel made by Edward Vomhoff. And a friend of mine ran a fishing tackle shop up in Innisfil, and some person walked in that wanted modern tackle, and he brought in this old rod and reel. So it was an Edward Vomhoff rod and reel, and it was pretty dirty, and he was trying to clean it up, but he didn't really know how to restore the rubber, or he didn't know what he was working with and how to make it work properly. So I went up there to see, he wanted to see how much I wanted to charge to fix it, and I ended up buying the reel, and I have it now. So these are very high quality reels. They're made out of solid German silver, which is basically nickel, and hard rubber. And it was designed to last forever. They're amazing reels. All right, so Hardy reels, everybody knows Hardy, Shakespeare, Mitchell, Pfluger, Abu. All of us here probably have some of those reels and more. If you don't, just be aware that there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of makers, and they're not everywhere, but most all over the world. And there's a pretty large list of reel makers and pictures of fishing reels on the Old Reel Collectors Association website. The concept of a trade reel is important when you're looking at fishing reels, because there are people that are the known makers of the reels, and there are people that sold them. So like a Bass Pro Shop will have a branded reel, Bass Pro Shop, but it was made probably in Japan these days. In the old days, they had trade reel makers going way back to the beginning of time. In America, which is the focus of the Old Reel Collectors Association, the big names were like Winchester, Bronson, Ocean City. Technically, Winchester never made a trade reel except for a few of their own brands. But here's an example of a Winchester raised pillar fly reel. It's marked Winchester and has the Winchester model number marked on it, so you know 100% it's a Winchester. The reel on its right is identical in its characteristics and the marking under the foot, but it's not marked Winchester. It's marked Alcock, Lake and Westwood, Toronto, which was a retailer from the late 1800s through about the 1960s in Toronto. And so somebody made this reel, and it was probably it was probably not Winchester itself. My research leads me to believe that it was one of the companies that acquired Winchester's fishing tackle division in the late 1920s, and that would have been Horrocks Ibbotson. And as I say, reels come from all over the place: England, Scotland, America, Sweden, Germany, Italy, even Canada had reel makers, a lot of reel distributors, not so many makers. Australia has a huge number of fishing reel makers. They have their own fishing reel museum online. It's fascinating, with reels that you've never seen or heard of. So those are the categories, and I wanted to explain from a collector's point of view where you get your information. And there are a couple here that I recommend. So there's price guides, guides on patents, guides about specific makers, guides about categories like spinning reels or the reels of Sweden or the Kentucky reel makers. So all kinds of categories are covered. This website of Steve Vernon's has a ton of information about collecting old reels, why you do it, and lots of great pictures and obscure. He is a research scientist, worked for a pharmaceutical industry, and he did research at the Smithsonian. The Old Reel Collectors Association has been going around for, I don't know, 20 years. They have lots of free information, but they also have a subscription to their newsletter called the Reel News. They have an online library, but you have to have a subscription to get into it. And it's got like 1,600 scanned images from like scanned catalogs or write-ups about old reels going back to the 1870s. First question I get asked is, what's my reel worth? And so to do that, it's a very straightforward process. It's pretty obvious when you think about it. You have to determine the make, model, and condition of the reel. Sometimes you can ascertain identification a number of ways. Just doing a Google search, go to eBay and go and search for a model, but ignore the asking prices. You also have reel price guides. I have a number of price guides. I've been collecting prices over time. The rarer reels trade by specialty auction, and there are subscription services as well. But the details matter. They really, really matter and can change a price very dramatically, just like with any antique, any collectible. So a couple of the members sent in some information for me to take a look and see what I could find. So one of them here from David at Latham, he sent in a Fluger Medalist 1494. So what I did, first thing I did is I went to the Orca Real Talk forum and I typed in Medalist 1494 to see what I could find out. That led me to an article on Fluger Medalist reels, so a highly specialized article, whatever, 5 or 6 pages that went through all the varieties according to a certain author. Then I went to a listing I happen to have of all the Fluger reels ever made. And I found out that the Fluger medalists were made before and after World War II. And I got the dates and the models. Then I went to the, that came from the Orca library online. Then I happen to have a price collector guide, and this is the 4th edition 2017. And it has like a whole raft of price records for that model of reel. But I don't put any value on those prices because they're anything more than yesterday is old school. You have to check eBay. That's the best way. But before you do that, you have to know what is the condition. And so Orca, down in the bottom right-hand corner, has a recommended guide on judging condition of a reel in both mechanical and cosmetic condition. So you have to think of all that stuff before you get back to figuring out what it is and what the price is. So in this particular reel, the design of the reel frame changed in 1959. Down in the bottom right-hand corner of the frame where the arrow is pointing, they used to say patented before 1959. And there are a whole bunch of other varieties and all kinds of subtle changes on these reels, like the pillar shapes and the foot shape and the hub shape and all that sort of thing. It has a certain rating, which I'm not going to get into. I can't tell from the pictures sent, and this is typical of having to work with pictures. I can't tell if it's complete, so I don't know if the tension adjustment knob on the rear rim is there. But I know because I have looked at those kinds of reels in detail, I know there should be one there.
I bought this reel at a garage sale.
Yeah.
This is Dean. And so what happened is I had 2 reels that were called finalists, they were just like garbage Canadian Tire reels, and they were both broken, and I took them apart and I put them together and made like an 8-weight finalist reel. So because I wasn't allowed to buy any more fishing gear, but I had 2 broken ones, so I put them together and I got one, and it was great. And what I liked about it was so simply mechanical that I could figure it out. Like I'm not that mechanical guy. And then so I got an 8-weight working rod, and it was great for reel and it was great for bass. And then I was at a garage sale and I saw this one. And I opened it up and I was like, oh my God, all the parts are metal. Like this might actually be a real one. The other ones were knockoffs of. So I paid $40 at a garage sale for it. And I hope to fish with it. That's why I bought it. I bought it like sort of so I can get as much fishing gear as I can hide in my house. So this is another thing that was like not not an internet purchase, just kind of like slipped it in the house, and I want to fish with it.
Yeah, it's definitely fishable. And these are great reels for modern fishermen. And
makes a great sound. It makes a great click, 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 click. Like it's amazing.
Very, very, very good reels for fly fishermen that are using bamboo poles or fiberglass or graphite. They work great. And one thing that I mentioned to Brian about reels like this, and I don't know about this particular one, but I don't know if you realize it, but you can take those two screws out carefully, because when it all falls apart, it's a pain to put it back together. But technically, on some of these, you can fill the arbor with BB's lead shot and change the weight so that it'll balance better on a rod. Find a new one in a box. It's probably worth $150.
Good. How would you clean the inside of this one up? Do you use a toothbrush, or do you put grease on it or anything?
Yeah, well, there's a whole thing on cleaning on the Old Reel Collector's site. In a nutshell, take all the line off.
Okay.
Give it a bath in, you could even do it with dishwashing detergent and water and a toothbrush. Of course, obviously you have to dry it off very well. The older reels, like the old brass reels, are actually a little more tolerant of cleaning. A reel like this, you can damage it quite easily. Like these, depending on the material of the grasps, you can inadvertently melt those with something common like WD-40. So with vintage reels, you do have to be quite careful of the chemicals that you use. Best not to use anything. A damp cloth is where you start. If you want to wash it down or use a toothbrush, use a toothpick. Those are the kinds of things. On some of the reels, I use like Neverdull, which is it's a mineral spirits in a wadding that you can wipe. Mineral spirits are usually pretty safe for these things, but they can lift off paint. So it's, it's a $50 reel in that condition. But this is Dave Thomas. Did I get Dave's name right?
Yes, you did.
Okay. So he had a couple of things. One was this leader box, and there was a plastic tippet spool in there. So the leader box, while it looks very old, is quite a common thing. We see them in antique and flea markets all the time. They look very, prestigious, but they're very common. I don't know when they were made, when they were circulated, probably in the 20s, 30s. I don't know, maybe even the 40s. And I've seen them with lining, like felt lining to absorb moisture. Unfortunately, they're not, valuable. It's $10 in that condition. I saw a listing on Etsy. They were selling 7 for 15. So pretty common apparently. These little plastic spools of line are actually collectible. And if you go online and Google the name Glenn L. Evans, you'll find it. It was a company in the 1950s that had 100 employees. You can learn about it. So it's not worth anything, but somebody does collect these things. There was also this beautiful old brass reel. I mean, I collect this sort of a reel. So I cannot identify the maker. I've got reels like this or similar reels. It is, it's one of the British makers, probably one of the big ones like Alcock or Heaton. And the distinguishing factor is the shape here of this cap, the end. It's not a cap, it's a journal opening. And also I can't see the very front of the reel. I don't know if that's a substitute screw or the big screw, because I've seen production models with both sides. This is a plate wind reel. And the one thing I tell is this is a storyteller. It's got all these gouges, and that is typically from braided silk line. So somebody really enjoyed this reel. And I believe it came from an estate in New Brunswick. And so somebody fished like mad with it and enjoyed it. It does have a wooden grasp versus a man-made ivory or a full ivory grasp, or cow horn or something like that. Now I could be wrong, that could be horn, but if it's bovine horn, then it's probably Heaton. If it's wood, it would probably be a more recent reel, but no later than say 1910. It has a constant check. You can see a little pin here on the back plate where the clicker is attached, or the clicker spring. I guess it's the clicker is attached. So you also sent in a Hardy Perfect. I have a collector book on British reels, and they had a section on Hardy. So what I found out, or what I believe it is it's a wide drum Hardy Perfect. This specific one was made in the range of 1905 to 1917. I can't see inside it from the picture, but you could tell the difference between a 1905 and a 1917 reel by looking at the check mechanism, which is the finger and the way that's mounted in there. Some reels, I think probably this is a bit too early, but later reels have maker initials in them, which doesn't change the value unless it happens to be D for Dingley. This was originally a leaded finish, so it was a darker, graphite color. And like all these old reels that were well loved and well used, the lead is worn off of them. Don't try and clean it with anything harsher than water. It's already rubbed off. Can't do anything to put it back on. I mean, there are people in Ontario that know how to put lead plate on reels that they're making that look like this, but they would probably refuse to restore a reel because it would be unethical to do that. Yeah, it's an alloy reel, so it's not a precious metal. It is fragile. So I find them a lot, they're cracked around where the cage meets the pillars meet the side plate. You have to inspect these carefully for cracks when you buy them. You can actually repair them to showcase on your shelf where you can fish. I can tell this had an option. It had the optional rim regulator and the protective bridge, which we see in brass, but I don't see the regulator knob. So it's been removed at some point or lost or fallen, or I just can't see it. That affects the value. If you look at the grasp, a lot of people that don't, collect like I do, don't have a clue whether these are man-made or, ivory or bone or whatever. Anything that you see that's got parallel lines like that is man-made. Nature never made parallel lines in anything. You can also tell if you have one of those little black lights that you can buy at Rona or Canadian Tires, a little spiral compact fluorescent black light, the kind that lights up a poster. There's some that light up posters and some don't. The one that lights up the poster, if you hold this in a dark room next to that, you'll see if it was ivory, it would glow. Hardy reels had smooth feet, and they had ribs on certain models, and I can't distinguish that in this picture. I'm assuming that it's smooth. There was a model of this reel that was called a Eunuch, which did not have ball bearings, but most of the Hardy reels had ball bearings in them. So you'd have to open it up, and you have to be careful with these when you do open them up. If they're really early and they have the ball bearings and you open them the wrong way, the ball bearings just fall out. They don't have a constricting ball race to hold them in. So you have to be careful with them. This would be perfectly fishable if you had the guts to go fishing with it. Perfectly fishable, tremendous capacity for spay fishing. Just don't drop it. I saw one of these in very good condition online in the UK that sold recently for 2,000 British or pounds sterling, 2,000, which is about $3,500. Realistically, I have sold these for as little as $350, $400. I would say they're worth about $500 US to a collector, but a lot of things that you inherit or things that you find along the way and you just have them in your possessions, the collector value, what somebody's willing to pay, is totally irrelevant. Then, is it Doug, Brian? Doug sent in a couple of reels. Yes. And these are very interesting. It's an interesting coincidence. The one, Canada's best fly reel, made in Montreal by the major, well, it's marked Major Rod Manufacturing Company Limited. Just coincidentally, I did a lot of research on another company called Lawson Machine Works. So they're not uncommon to people that collect tackle in Southern Ontario, but you wouldn't see one of those in the United States. It's not really worth anything, but it's an interesting reel and an interesting history, and I put that together. It was an engineer from Denmark that emigrated to Montreal in the 40s, and he set this company up and ended up moving to Burlington, Vermont, and he set up another company called Burlington Metalworks, and they also made reels. The Hardy marquee, of course, any reel with Hardy on it drives the collectors and the buyers nuts. Everybody loves a Hardy. The marquee is not that collectible, but it's great as a fishing reel. They do make a multiplying version of it. This is a single action reel, as far as I can tell from the picture. And this is from, it's a 1969 and beyond. So it's about $100. Any Hardy reel that's fishable is about $100, $150, unless it's a Hardy Perfect or a special reel. And there are some that go into the tens of thousands of dollars. Then there's this Fjord Reel at the bottom. And this, I don't know if that was sold by Canadian Tire, but I would say that it was sold in the Canadian market. It is a made in Japan reel, as far as I know. And it's basically a knockoff of a more popular brand name American fly reel, probably a Fluger Medalist or one like it.